what we'd like to do next is introduce Charlie Buchwalter, the president and CEO of Symphony Advanced Media. He'll show us how a single source panel can be used to measure SVOD services, such as Netflix, which no one else had really been able to do to date. Come on, Charlie. Do you want some? There's some water right there if you need it.
Thank you. So, as Jane mentioned earlier, we were here 3 years ago at the second annual conference where we did our cross-media ad effectiveness work, and I want to thank Jane and CIMM for their support over the years. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to talk a bit about work that we've really been focused on in the last 6 months. We've pivoted and done some very, very interesting work in the video space, and that's a large part of what we're doing and what I'm going to be sharing with you today. It would not be possible with the support of some fantastic companies. All of you are in the room, you know who you are, and I really want to thank you for your phenomenal support. These are the 4 capabilities we have at Symphony Advanced Media. Just very quickly, the work we did with CIMM 3 years ago was what we called our Ad Pulse capability. This is our cross-media ad effectiveness. Some of the other things we're doing with our ability to track cross-media, cross-device usage in a single source basis, we have some great insights into how consumers are using different platforms. That's our Consumer Pulse. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the very end because some of you may know that the private equity firm that owns us recently acquired Simmons Research. So we have some very, very interesting work on the consumer front there. The lion's share of what we've been doing really in the last 6 months has been totally focused on this product we call Video Pulse. And just a little bit about what we've been up to. We actually had a launch event in September of last year where we let the world know what our technology was able to do. The market pushed us in this area because they were really frustrated about 2 areas. The very first one was to gain many more insights in the area of delayed viewing. As more and more viewing is happening beyond the Live+7 currency, all the media companies want to understand how to monetize that. And of course, advertisers and agencies are just chomping at the bit to learn how to more effectively target those people. So they were looking for data to do that. The second thing was this whole emerging area of streaming originals. And this is the main thing that we have some data to share a little bit later. So that's the key thing that we've been focused on. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the methodology. Many of you are aware of what we do. I think that if our company did make a gamble a few years ago, it was to say these things were going to be the media of the future. We've developed an app technology that gets downloaded onto mobile devices, smartphones, and tablets. And we've built our own panel that is growing and becoming more representative on time. And another interesting thing to Jane's points about matching with census data sets, we have some great partnerships that are allowing us to enrich our data, certainly on the digital side, with some of those partnerships. But in a nutshell, the way this thing works, there's really 2 components to the technology. One of them is, you've heard before, ACR, a listening capability, so that with every broadcast, cable, and SVOD show that's out there, we immediately know passively that people are being exposed to it. We also have the ability, to some extent, through the meter being available on PCs, but also with these census databases to have very rich data on the digital side. This has been something that when we worked with Jane earlier, it was really a challenge on the digital side, and we've made a lot of progress since then. So in the next few slides, the next 2 slides are going to talk a little bit about the kind of data that our clients are using out of our syndicated service, the Video Pulse service. And the best way to read this is that, as you can think about it, every single program and episode that we are able to track, we have the ability of understanding when people are exposed to it. Is it live? Is it out 35 days, et cetera? And we can aggregate up in any number of ways. What I chose to do for this slide is basically look by network. And it's some really interesting stuff. Just so you know how to read this, the first 3 colors, the gray, the blue, and the pink, basically are your Nielsen numbers. It's a Live+7. And then as you go to the purple, the green, and the red, that represents by platform how people are viewing beyond the currency. And it's really kind of interesting to look at it across network. The main story here really is one of demos. As you look at CW and Fox, they do cater to younger people. and the programming is intensely focused on younger people, and we all know that younger people are more exposed to alternative platforms, et cetera. So it's much more nuanced than that, but I think that is basically what you see here. And I think when I share this with the folks at CBS, I'm not going to say that they agree with all of our numbers by any stretch of the imagination, but the fact people do know that CBS does skew a bit older. So these numbers seem to work out. Now, the real interesting question is, well, what about the platform usage? You know, okay, beyond the Live 7, what about OTT and VOD? And so here is some of the information that we have here. And once again, I have this broken out by network, but clients that are using our data can dice and slice it in any which way they want by any segmentation. But what we have here is, you know, you can start at the bottom with the VOD, Hulu, network apps, and then let's see, Amazon Prime and others. Now, because this is original programming, this current season original programming, you might say, where's Netflix? Well, that's the reason Netflix isn't here, because Netflix is used primarily to look at previous seasons. But there's some very interesting things here. First of all, the primacy of Hulu and how strong Hulu is. And then you look at the far right at CBS. Well, we all know that CBS did not have a relationship with Hulu. So what happens with CBS, if you try to find a show on Hulu, it takes you to cbs.com, and that's why the VOD seems to be larger with CBS. But this, in a sense, is how we got started. The ability to kind of track how consumers are viewing on a delayed basis. Now, this has been a fantastic year for us because in January this year at the TCA Awards, our very good friend Alan Wurtzel had a presentation. He had many things to cover, and he asked for 4 slides from us. And he was saying, look, since you guys do track streaming originals, how about you compare the audience you're seeing and the ratings you're seeing for them relative to what we saw in the early part of the fall season? And we certainly were not prepared for the response. I mean, it pretty much overwhelmed the industry for a 4 or 5 week period. My hair is a little bit grayer as a result, but it was really kind of a fun ride because we were right in the crosshairs. The folks at Netflix weren't too happy to see the data because they have really no reason to share the data. And basically, what Alan shared, I think was totally appropriate, and that is, look, you're starting to see some bumps on the streaming originals, but in the fall season, they were actually somewhat muted, and there was a significant gap between those programs and some of the broadcast and cable shows. Now, this is a slide I'll probably spend a little bit of time on because I think there's some new data on this, but let me explain what's going on this slide. What we have here are 6 of the Netflix streaming originals that basically, starting back in the fall with Master of None and Jessica Jones, just for clarity, the bottom 4 were basically the numbers that were shared with the TCA in January. And we kind of thought that was kind of the norm at the time, but I think this is a statement of how quickly things are changing and how none of us really have an idea of what to expect, in the coming months for sure. Making a Murderer and Fuller House obviously were quite successful according to our numbers relative to the previous ones. And I think they have 2 very different stories, and I'll share my opinion. Those of you in the know might disagree, and you probably are right, but here's what I take on it. Making a Murderer was a fantastic scenario because when it went live in mid-December, it actually started out at trace levels. I mean, we barely saw numbers there. Then what happened is Christmas came, and the week between Christmas and New Year's, first of all, everything else was on repeat, so there wasn't much original stuff going on. And then you had all the newspapers talking about this crazy law case. And by the way, wasn't there some TV show that focused on this? And it just took off. So one of the things that happened with Making a Murderer, it was really in week 4 and week 5 that it took off. And as you can see, our 35-day rating is a 9.65. It's a big number, and I think a lot of people are still coming to terms and kind of getting comfortable with what we're saying, and we're really benefiting from those discussions. Fuller House, totally different story. Fuller House actually came out with a bang, and the lion's share of the rating we see for this was due to episode 1. And what we saw is after episode 1, things declined pretty precipitously. I do give Netflix credit. Somehow they did hit a nerve in understanding why Fuller House might make sense. A lot of people I'm talking to are kind of gearing up for Gilmore Girls because they're saying, look, if Fuller House did well, that one is really going to do well, especially because Suki is going to be in it. And I understand the guy from Good Wife, whatever his name is, Carrie, is going to be on it too. So we'll see what happens with that one. So just another flavor of the kind of information we're able to generate out of our system. Now, this is an eye chart. I apologize for it. I think, Jane, people can get this if they want, right? They're going to be on your site. So let me explain what we did here. This is a little bit different than the other slides because what we've done is we've looked at a number of sequential Fridays. And what we wanted to do is look at the Friday, February 26th, that Fuller House came out. And what we have, this is for total day, not just prime time, total day viewership. And we have the, the breakout between live, DVR, VOD, Netflix here, Hulu, Hulu Plus, and other. And it's just kind of fascinating to see that when Fuller House came live, the Netflix share ballooned for a day or two. Now, and we saw that certainly for the younger millennials, the slightly older millennials, same kind of thing, but once you get beyond 35, not really at all. Very consistent thing that we've seen historically. Now, another couple of slides. This one is the Fuller House is another example of something that we've seen over and over again with most streaming originals with the exception of Making a Murder. And that is what happens on the far right is when it first comes out, people that watch Fuller House stopped watching other normal linear TV for just a week or two. And then what happens after that bubble happens, they revert through a number of different ways back to what they were watching before. We saw this in spades first with Orange is the New Black, and we're seeing it now with Fuller House. Now, just to finish up, going back to my very early slide, I talked a little bit about our consumer pulse. We are hearing from every ad sales research group that they're very, very interested to see what we're doing on a programming basis, but what they really want to understand is the consumer path in terms of how are consumers being exposed to different platforms. We had a meeting last week in New York, and I think in the next 2 days I heard the same thing over and over again. And the group up here, and Jane, in a sense, kicked off today talking about that as well. We're actually very excited to be able to work with Simmons Research. Simmons is now part of our family. We'll be integrating with them. They are very well known for their very elaborate consumer behavior survey. We, of course, have our behavioral technology that tracks video and TV usage, and the idea is to actually bring the two of them together so that not only will we be able to have all of the TV granularity in terms of viewership by platform, but be able to merge it with very, very deep consumer and buying behavior that exists in Simmons. The only other final thing that's on the horizon for us is in much the same way that our service is based on a national database of listening codes for programming. We basically are on the path to have the same capability for all ad campaigns that are out there. So think about that. In the same way that the mobile device, if it's near you and it's on, it will hear that you're watching Fuller House. It'll hear that a particular campaign was viewed as well. So we'll have the ability, and I think this is something that I first heard it from Howard Schimmel, but the idea of being able to do C plus infinity for any particular ad campaign. So that is something that we're hard at work on. We'll have later in the year. And with that, Jane, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you very much.